Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather. Sunday, the 14th day of October 2018. And moving on to the hazardous weather graphic, we've got flood advisories out here for the northern and southeast coast, Mendenhall Lake, Montana Creek, as well as some other small streams in the northern panhandle. That due to the 1.5 to 3 inches of rain that's fallen in this area in the last 18 hours. For example, Hoeppner's had 2.25 inches fall in the last 12 hours. So the real heavy rains that were back to the west yesterday and late Friday night shifted eastward, pretty much on track of the forecast from yesterday here into the northern southeast coast. And that's expected to continue through tonight. Next 24 hours, expecting anywhere from 1.5 to 5 inches additional rainfall in these areas, and out towards Sitka, anywhere maybe up to 6 inches falling in the next 24 hours, definitely the high end amount there. Otherwise, back to the northwest here, you can see in the Alaska Range, that's a wind advisory that kicks into effect 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, and that's for winds west of the Tote Cutoff through the passes to blow about 35, gusting over 60 miles an hour. So that'd be overnight tomorrow night and through Tuesday. And this is a winter storm watch there for the Yukon Flats area around Eagle River, Chukitzik. And that watch is for the next system coming up. It's going to bring the wind to the Alaska Range. Precipitation could start out snow in advance of that system initially before it changes over to rain. So we'll be watching for that again tomorrow evening and overnight tomorrow night. And then this is the old winter weather advisory that's been going on up there, mostly east of Arctic Village for the advisory zone, or for the advisory area. And that's out until 7 p.m. this evening. Could see another 1 to maybe 2 inches of additional snow on top of what already fallen up there. So it's going to keep things kind of slippery and slick. And then again, that ends at 7 p.m. Moving on to satellite imagery, you can see the clouds associated with that kind of hanging in there, especially around Arctic Village, on out to the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, where snow fell today, and that tapered off back to the west. Clear swath just south of there through the upper Yukon Valley, almost into the Fairbanks area. Looks like a few breaks around there, but back to the northwest, across the Kobuk Valley into the northwest coast. And then more clouds with the heavy moisture here flowing up into the southeast coast, south to north. It's now southwest to northeast, right into the northern panhandle. Clouds all the way down to the Queen Charlotte's. A few breaks here, eastern North Gulf Coast and toward the Wrangell Mountains. More clouds, mid and high level clouds coming in across south central Alaska. Had some sun breaks today over Cook Inlet, managed to sit in the valley. And then this system brought more rain into Kodiak during the day today. You can see several kind of surges of moisture coming northward. This mostly just clouds. This one has some precipitation with it, and that's reaching the southern Kenai Peninsula into Kamishak Bay today. And another batch here coming across the Alaska Peninsula and the southwest coast, and that kicking the winds up along the southwest coast this afternoon to 45 miles an hour. Cape Newenham, Togiak seeing gusts increasing to 35 miles an hour. And then Nelson Lagoon, also pretty windy conditions. Main low center still south of the Alaska Peninsula, and they're seeing 45 mile an hour wind gusts, about 35 there for the Pribilofs. And then coming back around to the northwest, gusting up to 45 miles an hour on Alaska, possibly even stronger over at Nikolsky. And then a little bit of a break here over the central Aleutians, and then some more cloud showers out over Shimia and Attu, kind of a dry zone right through here coming down to those northwest winds. Probably result in a little bit of sunshine, along with isolated showers for Adak and Atka, mostly Adak. Atka kind of on the edge of that precipitation field that's affecting the areas on into the eastern Aleutians. And then we've got an area of rain northward here across the Nunivak Island area, and then across Yukon Delta back to St. Lawrence Island, seeing periods of rain today and fog. Northeast winds 20 to 30 miles an hour up in that area. And rather breezy, but nothing too strong, as I mentioned. But winds are on the increase here along the southwest coast. And of course, pretty breezy in the Alaska Peninsula, rain up to Kodiak. And another wave here forming along this frontal boundary. With the heavy rain today, that's going to move right on up, and we'll see for tonight does just that, and that kind of holds the front over the northern panhandle. So continuation of the rain heavy at times and the flood advisories there. You can see dry to the south, still high pressure, British Columbia, keeping the moisture to the north, directing it all northward and then over the top between the two high centers. And more moisture with this warm front. Actually, this band is going to start pulling back to the north. See, for tomorrow, it does lift northward, so that drying area will expand northward with it. So look for the rain to start tapering off, especially in the afternoon here for the northern panhandle. Just isolated showers to the south. Periods of lighter rain will be lingering well into the afternoon here for areas from possibly Haines, Elfin Cove. Moderate rain again, Yakutat, due to this front coming up, and southerly flow once again on the increase there, along with a big increase in the winds, probably storm force winds coming into the Gulf of Alaska tomorrow night, and tomorrow night into early Tuesday. Big increase in the winds there. Gales forecast for Prince William Sound, maybe as high as 45 knots with that front now. It looks like tighter gradient, kind of a change from what we had yesterday. We'll look for rain to spread up across southeast interior, especially on the upslope areas of the mountainous terrain. So central Copper River Basin, I'll see the lightest amounts up toward the Alaska Range. South side, you see a little bit heavier, and probably nothing will get north of the Alaska Range there. Could get some light precipitation in Northway and Tok. Otherwise, dry in the northern interior and breezy and kind of cool, but not really cold. Northeast winds pretty gusty here for the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island through the Strait, as well as Cape Lisburne, Kivalina, and Point Hope. Maybe to Point Lay, not so much along the Arctic coast, just lingering flurries, mostly cloudy. Less snow than what you saw today, especially down toward Arctic Village and Atuvik. Could see some sunshine tomorrow. Gusty northwest winds on the backside of this low center, edging its way and finally getting across the Alaska Peninsula. Another trough, rain, Kodiak, South Bristol Bay, and probably some moderate amounts of rain here over the Kuskokwim Mountains down to the Auckland, maybe Kilbrook, as well as the Kenai Peninsula and North Gulf Coast. And then for the outlook on Tuesday, you can see the one low center in the front pushes well to the east, tracking up to the north to the Brooks Range. And again, it'll be overnight tomorrow night. You may see some snow, but a good push of warm air. That'll change over to rain definitely on Tuesday. But from the Brooks Range on out, Arctic coast, gusty east winds, periods of snow, possibly blowing snow up there. Another big shot of rain from the North Gulf Coast, moderate to possibly heavy at times of that trough, and then across the northern panhandle once again as that front tries to get some moisture into the southern areas, Annette, Metlakatla, but really struggling to get over toward Stewart. Otherwise, rain, Kodiak, big low here southwest of Kuskokwim Bay keeps it unsettled over the Aleutians. And lows tonight, teens in the east to lower 40s in the west to near 50 over the Alaska Peninsula. Highs tomorrow, 20s, Arctic coast and north slope to the Brooks Range with highs in the mid to upper 50s for the Panhandle, 55 to maybe 60 for the Bristol Bay area, upper 40s, lower 50s, south central Alaska. Lows the following morning, Tuesday morning, mid-teens in the Brooks Range, otherwise 20s in the Arctic coast, 40s in the Panhandle, 30s and 40s southern Alaska, and the highs for Tuesday afternoon, 20s on the north slope and Arctic coast and 50s down south.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First flying weather graphic today, or for tomorrow, Monday morning. VFR from the Yukon Delta Coast Norton Sound eastward into the interior, Susitna Valley, northern Cook Inlet, on up into the mid-Tanana Valley to the east there, over 40-mile country on down to the eastern Copper River Basin, central Copper River Basin, marginal. More IFR up here to the north, Shishmaref in across, just cutting in over the Selawik Valley into the south, and a big area up there over the Brooks Range, much of the north slope and Arctic coast. Marginal VFR mostly out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and Alaska Peninsula, Gulf of Alaska and across the Panhandle, pretty well IFR'd in over to about Cape Yakataga. And then on the afternoon, that expands northwestward into across Prince William Sound and northward there, probably to Isabel Pass, and down the coast across the Barren Islands into Kamishak Bay, IFR into the northern Panhandle, remainder of the southeast coast marginal, and some VFR here in the northwest, IFR on the north slope. And for Tuesday morning, a little more widespread in the IFR up there for the morning hours there. To the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, across the north slope, central eastern Brooks Range down into the Koyukuk and northwestern Yukon Valley. upper Yukon Valley there. Marginal VFR, areas of IFR, mostly along the western Alaska Range, southwest mountains, and IFR, North Gulf Coast, again, northward here into the, possibly the Talkeetnas to about Isabel Pass, and along the North Gulf Coast, northern Panhandle, becoming a little more VFR off to the southeast there. Otherwise, the Gulf of Alaska, marginal to Kodiak Island, marginal VFR all the way out across the Aleutians, northward to the Bering Strait. And then for Tuesday afternoon, really no change out west. You just lose the IFR, whatever was left out there in the morning hours is gone in the afternoon, just marginal well into the interior here, all of southern Alaska, marginal VFR. And a swath of VFR there, looks like roughly McGrath-Nikolai up across on the north side of the Alaska Range, greater Fairbanks area into the 40-mile country. IFR farther to the north to the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and a band of IFR, North Gulf Coast, southeast Copper River Basin, right on down across the northern central Panhandle, and for passes, Anatuvik and Adigan. Both should be VFR throughout the day, and Lake Clark and Merrill starting out VFR, then becoming marginal from south to north, with the moisture spreading up. And for rainy, take a little longer there, but still that moisture is coming up pretty rapidly. So VFR becoming marginal, marginal VFR kind of afternoon for that pass. Windy, same forecast, deteriorating conditions. VFR probably into the afternoon, then marginal later in the afternoon. Isabel, VFR, moisture really surging northward, so IFR throughout the afternoon. Mentasta, downward trend, not as bad as Isabel though. And Tanita, VFR becoming marginal, possible IFR on the eastern entrance late in the day. And for Portage, marginal becomes IFR probably by mid to late morning at the latest. Chilkoot and White, IFR. And for the freezing levels, cool air trying to push down into the Copper River Basin. 2,000 feet, they're just south of the Alaska Range, and then 8,000 feet here over the, actually just north of Yakutat, and about 10,000 over the central and southeast coast. Then cooling off a little bit here, 2,000 to 4,000 feet over the western interior on out across the Bering Sea. As far as icing goes, all that moisture coming up, pretty widespread area of considerable moderate, looks likely this time for the North Gulf Coast, pushing into the southeast interior and even up along the Alaska Range, westward, Prince William Sound, south coast of the Kenai Peninsula. Otherwise, this isolated moderate into the northern Panhandle, trying to push into the central interior, but not quite making it, and then a swath back along mainly the Yukon Delta across the Kuskokwim Valley. And the jet stream showing southerly winds, or this next trough out here, pushing eastward. Kind of a split in the flow here, one branch 100 knots right up into the North Gulf Coast, up and over the ridge over the Panhandle, or actually Queen Charlotte's there, the ridge axis. And strong jet out to the west, south of the Aleutians, 9,000 feet, south-southeast, 45-50 knots into the North Gulf Coast, lighter up to the north, east 40 across the Yukon Delta, northwest 25 to 35 for the Aleutians, about the same thing at 3,000 feet, 50-knot winds south-southeast into the Gulf of Alaska, 35 to 40 backside of this low, easterlies up to 40 knots there for St. Lawrence Island. Turbulence-wise, low moderate chop tomorrow, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, northern Panhandle, Seward Peninsula, southwest interior Alaska Peninsula, and the Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern. Looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Not a lot of change along the coast here, but expanding up through this area along the edge and through here. And that's where the biggest change expected over the next 4 or 5 days. This whole area could fill in with sea ice during the upcoming week. And for the coastal water forecast, southeast 25, small craft advisories on the south coast, gale warnings on the north coast, seas up to 14 feet. Southeast 25, gust 40 for Stevens Passage, and gale force gusts out of the southeast in the forecast for Clarence Strait, 6-foot sea, south 30 for northern Lynn Canal. And then the outlook on Tuesday, southeast 20 here for the central southern inside waters, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, south at about 20 at 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories here for much of the coastline. Out of the south, 25 to 30 knots on the south coast, and then gale force gusts turn into sustained southerlies at 35 knots for the extreme north coast. Those seas up to 17 feet. And for Prince William Sound, tomorrow afternoon, east winds increasing to 25 knots, and those winds will increase to 45 knots overnight tomorrow night. And probably see storms coming in after the gales increase to 35 tomorrow afternoon. Be storms tomorrow night for the Gulf of Alaska. Otherwise, Cook Inlet, north to northeast, 25 to 30 knots. Northeasterly gales for Kamishak Bay. Southeast gales for the islands there. And then for the outlook for Tuesday, northern Cook Inlet, lighter winds southeast at about 10 and 20 knots south of the Forelands. South 20 knots, Kamishak Bay, and the Barren Islands. South 25 knots with 12-foot seas and 20 to 25 knot winds, 12 to 14-foot seas for the North Gulf Coast. And southeast coming down to 20 knots for Prince William Sound after a very windy Monday night. And for Shelikof Strait, east 30 knots, southeast 25, east side of Kodiak, Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, southeast 30 knots, 17-foot seas. And north side of the peninsula on into Bristol Bay, east winds at 30 with 7-foot seas. And looking ahead to Tuesday, they'll swing around to the southwest and south, 20 knots there, right up on into Bristol Bay, those seas 5 to 6 feet. Southwest winds here at 30 knots from Cape Sarachev on up to Sitkinak, turn south at 30 up the east side of Kodiak and the Fognak Island area, south 20 for Shelikof Strait. And the Fox Islands tomorrow, northwesterlies 20 to 30 knots, 7 to 15-foot seas. And the central Aleutians, northwest 30, 13-foot seas, northwest 30-knot winds, all the way out to Shimianatu, with the seas running 11 to 12 feet. And then the outlook for Tuesday, northwest 30 for the far western zone out there. And then from Kiskasay to Adak, gales northwest 35 on down south of the Adak Island areas with the gale force winds on the north side, 30 knots out of the northwest. And the Fox Islands, west-northwest 20 to 30 knots with seas 8 to 15 feet. And along the southwest coast, east 30 knots tomorrow. Seas 10 feet, northeast at 15 for the Pribilofs. Gale force northeasterlies, St. Matthew Island, seas up to 13 feet. And northeast winds for both Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island with 6 to 11 foot seas. Outlook for Tuesday, gale force northerlies for St. Lawrence Island, 14-foot seas, small craft advisories for Norton Sound, north 25, north of Nunivak Island, northeast at about 20 there, coming out of Kuskokwim Bay, 5-foot seas, north 25 over the Pribilofs, 9-foot seas, and another day of gale force winds for St. Matthew Island, the northern Bering Sea, those seas running as high as 17 feet. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, easterlies at about 15, 2 to 4-foot seas tomorrow, northeast 15 central coast, and then those increase. We've got small craft advisories for the western coast all the way down to Wales, all out of the northeast with seas 6 to 8 feet. Outlook for Tuesday, gales coming into the picture here from the Bering Strait right on up to Cape Beaufort with northeast winds 35, 12 to 13-foot seas, small craft advisories for the remainder of the coastline, about 25 central and west side out of the east-northeast, east 30 knots here for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast on over toward Mackenzie Bay. And for tonight again, that winter weather advisory ends there from Arctic Village East in the Brooks Range on out to the North Slope, but light snow will continue throughout the night, especially up toward the coastline there, and just flurries back to the west, dry in the interior, increasing winds here in northern Bering Sea and the Seward Peninsula. Heavy rain again, flood advisories northern Panhandle, could see 1 to 5 inches of rain or more in the next 24 hours. And more rain will come in after a little bit of a break here this evening for Kodiak Island. And the next day, rain and wind back to the North Gulf Coast, pushes off to the northeast on Tuesday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.